Hey everybody, welcome to Better Pickleball. It is a new weekly show, actually. We're going to go weekly live, at least in the interim, while we're kind of stuck inside our houses. You might be used to me doing a monthly live show, and I've done that for quite a long time, but this is going to be a little different format. It will be the Ask Me Anything. And so, how are... I'm hearing, there we go. Okay, we got this set. I was something technical, but we're doing a weekly Ask Me Anything. And this is going to be a lot of fun today because I have with me today Rafael Filippini from Gearbox. Welcome, Rafael.
Hi, thank you, CJ, and nice to be here.
Now, if you were on the summit, you saw his smiling face. He actually, I think, was our closing speaker on the summit. You were here on Wednesday, and he was talking about eyewear. And I'm just going to say something. They make some great protective eyewear. If you haven't seen that video from the summit, I will put a link to it in the show notes down below. But when he was here talking about his eyewear, of course, there are a lot of questions about his paddles because I love the Gearbox paddle. I'm playing with the Gearbox paddle. And so I turned around right away and said, you know what, we got a ton of questions. It's just going to be easier to have you come back and talk about the paddles. And that's what we're going to do today. And so what we'll do is we're going to have Rafael tell you a little bit about the company and about him. And then we will answer your questions. So just a little cleanup thing, just in case you weren't here for the summit. I have some wonderful moderators in the chat. I have Dale. Thank you so much, Dale. Appreciate you being here. It is easy for her to capture the questions if you write the word question in front of your question. That way she knows that you're asking something because there's a lot of chat going on in there. We also have Anthony from Gearbox is in the chat, as well as sponsored player Laura Fenton-Cavanda is in the chat. So a lot of ways to get your questions answered today. So that's what we're here for, is ask me anything. So first of all, I'm going to turn this over to you, Rafael. Just in case somebody doesn't know, why don't you tell us who you are and give us a quick history of Gearbox?
Okay, well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Rafael Filippini. I'm the founder and CEO currently of Gearbox. We are a sports brand. We were established in 2007. Our focus is in, well, we're a carbon fiber technology company focused in developing sports or improving equipment, sports equipment. So things that are made of, that were made of wood. Now in pickleball, a lot of paddles have the plastic core. So we're looking for ways to improve, get away from materials that are heavy and not as strong, and working toward higher strength, lighter, high strength to weight ratios, such as carbon fiber, fiberglass, and other fibrous materials, including some resins and techniques that help build better products. So that's sort of our background in terms of what our company is founded in. So I'm a sports enthusiast, or I'm more of an athlete, I would say. So I sort of combined and married both of those loves that I have, one for inventing, engineering, and then also on the sports side, always being active and playing.
And you really got your start in racquetball. So how did you get into pickleball?
Well, you're right. We began in racquetball, and that was our foundation. We knew to build on our supply side from the racquetball end, the engineering techniques that we use, which is called the bladder molding or internal pressurize. We pressurize parts internally and then use a cavity mold to build these carbon fiber products. So naturally for us, as we were touring and playing through a lot of events, we would go to clubs, presenting our products, taking our professional athletes in racquetball. And we ran across pickleball several times, and we were invited to play, and we played, and I was a little younger. I was about 35, and I was running around with other pros that are in their mid 20s. And so as we were being challenged, the gentlemen and ladies that challenged us were a little bit older than us, and sometimes even quite older. And but it came to our surprise. We're thinking, oh, we're these great athletes, right? And we're going to play. And well, obviously, we didn't play that much. So, we found ourselves playing against these great players, and we're like, oh my God, we're supposed to be able to move faster and return the ball and have better reflexes. So we thought, right? But not quite so. So that's how we were sort of introduced into the sport, and naturally being competitive, and the people that I ran around with being competitive, like, boy, we got to take a look at this sport a little bit more. And it took us about 3 years from that first introduction until a little bit later we started looking at the equipment. We were looking how the sport was growing, how quickly it was developing. So that naturally, from a business standpoint, we said, boy, we've got to really pay attention to what's happening with this industry. And so for me, I wasn't only looking at the industry and how to enter and be a participant. And what I mean by that is taking a Honeycomb product or products that were already available in the market and say, well, we're going to do the same thing and just put our brand on it. That's not what Gearbox is. So what we do is we look at a sport, and particularly the equipment, and say, well, gosh, how can I improve the equipment? One's in performance, durability, and other characteristics that we can bring to the equipment to make better athletes and make better players. So that's sort of our foundation, and how we look at sports when we enter new markets or new sports.
I love it. I have to tell you, I haven't heard that story, and it has that impact because I too when I was introduced to this game, got my butt kicked by a 75-year-old who was getting ready to have a hip replacement. Now, I know there's a lot of good 75-year-old players, but I thought I should be able to beat this guy hands down, and it just wasn't that way. So I understand there's a lot to pickleball. Let's talk about the technology, because you have some really interesting technology that makes Gearbox pretty unique in the marketplace. And I know that's the solid span technology. So why don't you tell people what it is? What's at the core of the paddle?
Okay, so solid span technology, essentially what we have done is we've taken the plastic honeycomb core out of our paddles. And then also, like I said, we introduced our molding technology, and which means it's a cavity molded, internally pressurized system where we build a rib structure, the face. So essentially, for example, on Honeycomb, I have a piece of Honeycomb here. This is the front view of it, sort of the side. This is essentially you can think of them as little straws sort of cut and sort of glued side by side. So the strength is on the upper side, but actually there's zero strength from here. So we take the strong side, and then we apply the surfaces. So this would be one of the surfaces, and we glue that onto the plastic and do the same thing to the bottom. So then this is a honeycomb structure. This is a good structure, and it was better than wood. It had lighter, and you can make it have a little more design freedom with it. But in looking at that, that's still, from our standpoint, like, we have better techniques, the same techniques that are being used to create aerospace, aircraft, satellites, race, Formula One cars, all the technologies that from these industries we take and utilize very similar processes to create the pickleball paddle. So what we have done is, and let me talk about carbon fiber. Carbon fiber, this is a carbon fiber small sheet. This is a representative of what our our rib is made of, or our solid span. So we take about 32 of these guys. We roll them and make a tube out of it. So when we roll it, there's a tube, and you can see. So then what we end up doing is we join 32 or so of these tubes side by side. Then we take a layer, and then we envelope, or we enclose the entire face. So I will show you what that looks like here. So then we have the tubes on the inside, and then we take these face plies and apply, close it off, and then you can see here, these are air nozzles that we pressurize the paddle from the inside. This looks very crude because it's before it goes in the mold. And then I sort of rip some flies off from the front. So that's why you see maybe it doesn't look quite as clean. But the idea is that we pressurize it internally. Also, each one of the ribs have a special material that activates at 130 degrees Celsius. And then these cells expand evenly at one time. They expand at about 70 to 80 times its original size. So you can imagine 32 of these cells just expanding and blowing up. So it creates tremendous pressure. So I'll show you, this is the top portion of a paddle. And when we do pressurize it, you can see how the black is actual carbon fiber in between each one of these cells. And then, so that is joined, the solid span would run the length of the paddle. And then what happens, it creates a bridge between the front surface and the back surface. So when this piece is all molded, it becomes one unit. So then I cut another piece here to show you, and I remove the cells from the core to show you that the structure is actually these bridge systems that are uniformly created and these are spaced out every 5 millimeters. So the trick, and then we have a patent on this, and it's not only a patent for design, but the actual process on it's quite unique in terms of getting all these cells to expand evenly and build the structure. So once what happens, you take all these different parts, which is about 200 pieces, you sort of put them all together in a puzzle, and then you heat it up inside the mold, and it all gets sort of liquid, and all the fibers get trapped inside, and everything's being pressurized. So then once it cures, the resin takes about 30 minutes. It's what it's called a thermal set resin. Then it cures and it's set for life. You cannot change a thermal set resin other than once you, let's say, burn it at about 1200 degrees. And so anyway, the structure itself it's an extremely strong structure, where in a honeycomb paddle, really you have an adhesive, a glue that glues to the surface, and another glue that glues to the top. So this structure is very soft, not as strong. Also, the edges are generally exposed. I cut another paddle here. So they're exposed, and that's why you find the rubber edge that goes around that gets glued on a traditional honeycomb paddle. So that's just really there to cover the exposed plastic. So why do we choose carbon fiber and go about this technology? Well, plastic is non-structural, very little structure to it. When you heat it up, it gets soft, or when you go to very cold environments, it becomes very brittle. So it doesn't behave well in the ranges of temperature. Carbon fiber, you can freeze it, you can go to extreme temperatures, and it's going to behave the same. The other thing is, because these pieces are not bonded, it's all molded in one piece, the structure is not going to break apart. So a lot of times in honeycomb paddles, you have dead spots or what they call, hey, my paddle feels dead, or I've got these dead spots throughout the face. Well, what actually happens is a dead spot really means that the fiber essentially separated from the cell. So, and that happens because the glue is not very strong, and it's just over time it's going to break away from the surface. So To me and anybody that works with composites, you look at a honeycomb panel and you say, okay, that's good. And aircraft do use it, but they use it for floor panels. You're never going to really see it on wing structures or any of the main structures that support the aircraft. So carbon fiber and molded processes or bladder molding process are a much better way to build products. Sorry, that was a little lengthy, but trying to get a lot of out there.
You are, and I got to tell you, I can just see our paddle geeks salivating in the chat, right? They're going like, show me more, show me more. I mean, the chance to see the insides of paddles and the difference. So I think you've done a fantastic job, because I know that's a lot of the questions we are starting to get at first was, what's the difference between the Gearbox paddle, the solid span technology, and a Honeycomb? But maybe now, before we get to a couple questions, because I've got some real specific ones, what's the difference between a Gearbox paddle and some of the other carbon fiber paddles that are out on the market?
Okay, so we'll go back to the Honeycomb paddle here, right? So when they say I've got a carbon fiber Honeycomb paddle, essentially they're just talking about the surface ply. So this is what they'll say, it's carbon fiber, but and all they're doing is taking the surface and gluing it on to the plastic. So essentially you've got carbon fiber on the top or on both the front face and the bottom face, and that is your carbon fiber. But essentially the entire paddle or the core of it is going to be a plastic core. Where with our paddles, you can see the carbon fiber, we take each one of our tubes like this one, and then so this tube represents each one of these cells. So we take this long tube and run it the length of the face. So these tubes are actually extremely strong. You can see they start off very thin, so they're more flexible. Well, once this resin cures, this becomes extremely, its tensile strength, it's a very, very strong material. So tensile strength means when you pull tension, and then there's compression. So you can twist it, you can form it, and it behaves differently depending on the fiber angle. So this one, you can see I'll peel some fibers off here. Can you see that? So that's at a 45-degree angle. So we can work with 0, 10 degrees, 19, 30, 35, all the way to 90. And each one of those angles will give us different flex points. So 0 degree would be stiff if I were to push down on the side. This is 45. You can see it doesn't even stand on its own. So this is very flexible. So that gets sort of, I can explain maybe a little bit of how we create our power series and our control series is simply by changing these fiber orientation and creating flex, or we use materials that absorb energy and take energy away from the ball, and therefore we have more of a control paddle. And so that's how by manipulating these fiber angles and fiber types, we can absorb energy from the ball or return more energy to the ball.
Because and that I'm glad that you gave that lead in, because we're getting a lot of questions about the control versus the power series. So let me and these are really from kind of this the playability standpoint. So two of these kind of tie together. Dale Voigt asked the differences between the control and the power, and Waylon kind of tied into that, and it said, how do you know if you should buy the control or the power? So maybe you can lead us there.
Sure. So I will show you, we have a control paddle here and a power. So essentially, like I said, the design of the internal makeup of the ribs is going to be exactly the same on both. What changes is the fiber angles, so where we change these fiber angles to have the paddle maybe provide a little bit more flex this way, or absorb energy, provide less torque, and along this same rib, we can change the fiber angles down each one of these tube sections. So when we do that, and this tube runs the length of the face, we can have the core either absorb energy or return energy back. Now, why would you want a control paddle? Let's say, and what we mean by control is we really have a softer paddle. So when the ball hits the surface, this paddle is going to feel softer. The ball is going to stay on the face longer. Therefore, you have more time with the ball on the paddle face, so you can manipulate your shot. Where with a power paddle like the Joey Farias model here, this is going to feel stiffer. So what happens when the ball hits the surface, it's going to jump off the face much faster. And that's not because the core is stiffer here. It's the entire structure and the paddle is actually acting in a different manner. So therefore, when the ball hits, it flexes, and then the paddle will return more energy to the ball. Same thing, we can, just like we can create the more either stiffness or have more energy return to the ball this way, we can create a perimeter around the paddle to provide a more livelier edge. As we get closer to the edges of the paddle, we can create more of a lively feel. And that is how we actually create a much larger sweet spot on our paddles than you can with a honeycomb type of a paddle. You're very limited when you only use the surface plies, but when you're also using the three-dimensional, the depth of it, we can control how these fibers behave throughout the entire paddle. And actually, our paddles are molded. I can show you here. This entire paddle, as you can see, we have these contours. The mold and the handle is a part of the paddle itself. So the face, the frame, and the core is all connected to the handle. So this whole paddle becomes an energy system, essentially. And whether we absorb it or we return it, that's the difference between the power and the control.
All right, hopefully that's going to answer some of those power and control questions that are coming through. If not, you can still put your question down below and we'll try and get it answered. Can you talk a little bit more, because I got a question from Roly Poly and he's talking about the paddle with the large sweet spot. Was that the Gearbox GX6? So maybe if you can talk a little bit more about the sweet spot. I know you mentioned that a little bit, as well as maybe the differences between the 5 and the 6.
Yes, the difference on the sweet spot between our GX5 and GX6 models compared to a honeycomb, like I said, because we're applying all these different plies throughout, and we can lay each piece by hand. I'm going to show you a quick. This is a map, a little guide that shows each one of the plies. So there's about 200 plies, and this is like a little map showing where each ply goes and throughout the paddle, what type of material. So this up here is the frame. This would be the core, and then this is the handle pieces. So all these pieces are laid throughout the entire face of the paddle. So by doing that, around the perimeter, we can change our materials to make this a livelier material. So when we talk about the sweet spot, is you have that rebound of the ball on the face jumping off. So as we get closer to the edges, generally there's more torque involved. So when you hit the ball, the paddle is going to want to twist when you're off center. So what we do is liven the perimeter, so that prevents the twist. The ball jumps off the face a little bit faster. So therefore, that's how we can create more lively perimeter in a more uniform sweet spot throughout the paddle. So a lot of people, when you experience and you play with the Gearbox paddle, they say, God, it seems like I can hit anywhere around the paddle and I still get a good shot. And that is particularly because of the molded process and the way we design the paddles. we can generate more power around the perimeter, therefore giving you a larger sweet spot. And the question whether the difference between the two paddles, really on the GX6, which is a longer, a little more, a longer, more narrow paddle, the sweet spot, it gets elongated as the shape of the paddle. So the sweet spot will follow the shape of the perimeter of the paddle. So this one being not quite as long, but it's a little bit wider. So this paddle will give you a little wider sweet spot this way. The advantage to a thin paddle like this, when you go to roll it for topspin, because this is not as wide, it's going to rotate much faster. This one is going to be a little wider. The rotation will be a tiny bit slower, but when you swing it from left to right, it's going to swing faster because you don't have such a long lever like you do with the GX6. So this one will be a little bit slower swinging left to right, but you have that advantage when you roll and put top spin on the ball or cut it. Where this one's going to be faster around the net. You'll sacrifice a little bit of that roll. It still has plenty, and I'll talk about how thin our paddles are. We purposely make our paddles thin because we can create a very strong structure, and having a thin paddle reduces the resistance this way. It's not air resistance, but you just have less volume to move. So it just becomes very quick. So having a thin paddle, you're able to impart much more spin, and therefore, when you hit the ball, you can probably put a little more velocity to it, but because it has more spin, the ball's going to drop and stay in the court more often than not.
I'll tell you, you knocked off a lot of questions on
sorry.
that one. No, that's a good thing. You got them going because, Paul had asked if you had plans to make a thicker core, and I think you pretty much answered that one. But the next question that we're getting a lot of would be about paddle weight. So maybe you can talk about, first of all, why Gearbox is different. I know it goes back to the technology, but maybe explain why it's different with the weights and what the different weights are that's available in those two, in the 5 and the 6.
Yes, when we go back to the weight, and I'll bring my honeycomb paddle here. But the reason the honeycomb paddles, let's say we have an 8-ounce paddle, and here's sort of the rest of it. The reason why a honeycomb paddle feels heavier than an 8-ounce honeycomb paddle will probably feel heavier than our 8.5 honeycomb paddle. Why? Because one, remember we have the plastic core. Well, this is sort of a homogeneous structure, so you can't make the weight of the honeycomb lighter at the top than you can the honeycomb that you have coming down to the face. They would essentially need to, if they wanted to do that, is cut sections of honeycomb and then glue them together and say, okay, I want a heavier material in the center and then a lighter honeycomb at the top. But when you do that, you really are compromising the structure even further than just applying a more uniform honeycomb structure. So the disadvantage to that is that because plastic is going to be heavier and you have the plastic toward the head more, well, when you go to swing your paddle, you're going to feel that head weight. And that's why an 8-ounce paddle will feel heavier than or just about the same as our 8-ounce paddle. So the advantage we have, remember that little map I showed you, we can actually put more of the weight in the center of the paddle. We don't need to put a lot of weight at the head, so therefore it's going to swing light and it's going to be very maneuverable. So that is another advantage of being able to put all these hand plies and build the paddle a ply at a time and sort of build each structure as we go.
Okay, cool. So let's see. We have Jim Camasto asked, is the balance point the same when comparing a control versus a power, assuming it's the same model, same weight?
They're going to be very close. And I would say yes. What happens when we build a heavier paddle, we shift the weight more down toward the center of the paddle. And when we build a light paddle, then so it doesn't feel like a feather in your hand, or you don't have a lot of weight, then we have, the lighter the paddle is, then we move weight more away from the center and more toward the top of the paddle. So by doing that, we're able to get the swing weight to be almost the same. And swing weight really refers to a measurement of that tells us where that material or most of the mass is placed along this paddle. So a lot of times people get balance confused and they think, well, I'm going to balance the paddle and I'm going to make it lighter. I'm just going to add more weight at the handle. Well, that's not true. It will change the balance, but it will not change how the paddle feels as it swings through the air, because you're adding the weight where the rotation or the fulcrum over the rotation of the paddle is. So therefore, you're not going to feel the weight here. Now, if you begin to get away about 5 inches away from your hand and you add 1 or 2 ounces here, you'll definitely feel the weight. So a lot of times people get confused because they say, well, I'm going to make it head lighter by adding weight in the handle. That's not so. But to answer Jim's question is, the lighter the paddle is, the more weight we shift toward the head of the paddle, because we wanted the swing weight to have some mass behind it. Otherwise, it would feel too light, and then the weight of the ball would sort of push the paddle back. So we need that weight at the head to create a little more mass when you swing the paddle.
Okay, cool. So we're getting some questions about the 2 different weights. So let's just stay on weights right now, because there's 2 different weights for each of the paddle. Maybe you can tell what those weights are, as well as what's the best way for somebody to choose a weight that's appropriate for their game.
Okay, generally, well, let's go to the weight question. So we have a 7.8 ounce paddle, and then we have an 8.5 paddle. Let's say, and remember, we'll go back to our little map and guide on how we tell, how each paddle is made. Well, when we do our layout in our what we call our layup, both of them are going to be the same. Now, how do we increase, a half an ounce or 0.7 ounces from one paddle to the other by increasing the weight? How do we do that? Well, we'll go back to our ply of carbon fiber. So then this, you have an area. So the way we do that is we keep the same map in terms of the construction, but what we do is we increase the density of the fibers. So they call this fiber aerial weight, or the density of this ply. So by us increasing the number of fibers that are in this section, we can increase its weight by keeping very similar properties. So that's how we're able to increase more. That 0.7 ounces is we literally just increase the weight, or the fiber aerial weight. We don't remove plies per se. Well, hey, I want to just make it lighter, I'm going to take some plies out. No, we actually use the same number of plies, but we reduce the amount of fiber in each one of those plies, if that makes sense.
Sorry about that. I didn't unmute myself. So a little pause there. I have to tell you, one of the things, and Paddle Geek is in the chat, Brandon Swanson, who was here at the summit. Yeah. He was on a different day. He was on Monday. And he just wanted to share, he said, people are surprised when they try the 8.5 ounce demos that I have. They're balanced so well that it doesn't feel that heavy. I like the stability and just a more solid feeling of that paddle. Trying to read and talk at the same time, right? Okay, let's see. We have still a couple of questions coming in again about the edge guard, right? And I think you explained why you need an edge guard on the Honeycomb. But there's more questions about the durability of the edge, and does it chip without having an edge guard?
Okay. The paddle will not chip. You can grind it down, particularly if you play outdoor and you're playing in a sanded surface. That's like taking a grinder or a file and you're filing away. No matter what material you use, if you're sort of just filing away with every stroke, there's some people that drag their paddle either after the swing or maybe before they get down, in the kitchen and then they drag the paddle maybe to scoop some balls. So that could eventually wear through the frame, but we have so much structure here. Even if you were to make a hole in the paddle here, it's not going to affect its play. Now, remember we talk about I'll kind of go back to our little graph or our cutout. If you look, you could see the thickness of the edge, which is about almost 50 thousandths of an inch near the edges. That is a tremendous amount of carbon fiber. So I will do a little demonstration, and we do this at a lot of events, but here I'm going to take the edge, a regular paddle, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit away. And you can see on the surface, you're not going to damage or create any damage to the structure. It's going to be a very strong. Same thing with the face of the paddle. It's going to withstand a tremendous amount of force. Now, can you break a paddle? Absolutely. You have to exceed that force, but if you're going to go smash this paddle against the ground, or like I said, if you constantly grind through, you could eventually wear through the edge. So the way to prevent that, we always suggest that you get a little piece of bumper tape or protective tape, and not necessarily to protect the paddle, but the bumper tape is there to sort of give you a guide as to say, hey, you've worn through the bumper tape. You're now going to start going through the carbon fiber. So replace the tape, put another strip either in that area or change the entire thing, and let that be your guide as you're wearing through so you're not going to grind through the paddle edge. Now, if you play indoors, don't worry about it. On the wood surface, you're not going to damage, you're not going to grind it down. It's only when you're playing outdoors and the sanded surfaces where they put the sand onto the surface of the court that you'd probably worry. Or some people play on concrete. Concrete, it's going to be like I said, like a file that wears through. But I mean, you don't have to worry about it, even if you do nick it and you hit it. I'm just talking about consistent wear that you'd have to hit that many, many, many times to wear through.
Okay, and I will tell you this, for me personally, I love not having an edge guard on the paddle. I don't hit it on the sweet spot all the time. And when you hit it on a paddle that has an edge guard on it, you get a lot of strange off-center shots. And one of the things that I definitely noticed when I started playing with Gearbox was that I was more consistent on those off-center shots, and it's kind of like the game of golf that I used to play, right? It's a game of misses, right? Whoever misses the best often wins the most.
That's right.
Let's see, before we we're going to get you into some paddle suggestions because we've got a few of those coming up, but have one more kind of specific question on the technology. So Kenneth Lacey wanted to know, does Pro Kennex use similar technology?
They do not use similar technology to Gearbox. Their technology essentially is a honeycomb paddle, just like this one. The only difference, what they do is they put it in the mold, and then they apply, they will apply a little bit of carbon fiber around the edges to protect the corners. But essentially, it is still, they use actually a plastic surface to glue to the plastic honeycomb. And then there's like a decal that goes over that. And then they use a carbon fiber strip just around the edge. So it's a little better process but it's still a honeycomb paddle. So again, we have a patent, and what a patent means in anywhere is that it's very unique. So in order to be awarded, and it's not only a design patent, it's actually a utility patent that talks about how we build the structure, how we pressurize it. Remember I mentioned that it's kind of a unique, very unique and very tricky to be able to mold internally and create these beautiful perpendicular ribs, all that are evenly spaced. And, you know, imagine blowing all these guys up at the same time and with pressure and keep them in uniform like this. That's quite a feat to be able to do that. And not only one time in a lab, but thousands and thousands and thousands of times in a production situation. So very different from the Procanics paddle. So again, there's nothing like what we have in the industry. Again, because this edge is not an edge that is put on, rather it's all part of the paddle itself, all the way from the head down into the handle. I have a model that shows this is the paddle coming right out of the mold. You can see how this is where we inject air. It's all pressurized. You can see all these contours. The carbon fiber actually molds the handle, the entire head, and in the whole, it's all one piece. So this is a very, very strong structure.
Okay. All right. So let's get into, we're getting some questions on picking paddles. So I'm going to tie two of these together. So M. Thompson asked, what paddle would you suggest for a 60-year-old female beginner intermediate player? She's new to Gearbox. And we'll tie that into, you know, she asked a pretty specific question there, but we're also getting questions on what's the best way to pick the weight of the paddle.
Okay, generally what we do, if somebody's been playing pickleball already, I first ask, what paddle do you play with? Generally, they say a 7 ounce to an 8 ounce paddle. And if it's a Honeycomb core paddle, then I actually steer them to our 8.5, because our 8.5 paddle is going to feel very much the same to their 8 ounce or 7.8 ounce paddle, because of that weight distribution we talked about. Ours is going to be, the weight is going to be more in the center. So when they actually swing this, it's going to feel almost the same in their hand. Why do I do that? I don't want to put somebody into a lighter paddle, because when they pick it up, it's going to feel much lighter than what they're used to. And I want to just keep things sort of even in terms of the comparison initially. And then once they're able to go in and use a thinner paddle and much more maneuverable paddle, then probably after a few months, that's when they can experiment. Anytime you use a lighter paddle, I would imagine same thing in golf, a lighter head speed or a lighter club, the heavier one's going to give you more stability, because the mass of the club, you don't have to quite swing as hard. You've got more mass, so then that mass is going to push the ball. When you have a lighter club, you're going to have to generate more swing speed, or in this case, a paddle, in order to generate that velocity on the ball. So you're generally, what happens is you have to change your stroke. So the lighter the paddle is, you're providing more of that power, because you're swinging through the air, the paddle, or you're swinging the paddle through the air a little faster to generate the speed, or you're tending to push the ball just slightly to counter the weight of the ball as it's coming at you. To block, they're very nice sometimes. The lighter the paddle, though, it's gonna, when you're blocked, let's say somebody drives the ball at you and you block it, the lighter paddle will push back in your hand more. So that's where maybe a little bit more weight is more comfortable if you tend to block the ball a lot and you want to just drop it in the kitchen on the other side. So when you choose, it really, it's not so much a choice as what paddle do I want to use. It's more of a choice as what game style do I want to have, and then you adjust the paddle. So lighter paddles are going to be much faster, and then you're going to want to be quick with your hands, where with the heavier paddle, you allow the paddle to do more of the work for you. That's how we sort of define the differences between, do I want a lighter or heavier paddle?
We're also getting some questions, and Mario Najera said you do make a paddle with edge guard, right? And because you do make some honeycomb paddles still, correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay, and so when you talk about the difference in technology, and you've gone through the you've done a great job in going through the solid span technology. When somebody's coming in, what would make them not want the solid span technology? I mean, because you have those other options. So how should people choose?
Generally, they choose one by brand knowledge or by popularity. So, the first choices are they'll choose, for example, honeycomb, because a lot of people at their club are using a particular paddle that's made out of honeycomb. But that doesn't mean that you're using the best product out there per se. Now, the other reason why you would want to go into a honeycomb, building a honeycomb paddle is much or it's less expensive, I would say, to be able to build it. The way honeycomb paddles are built, they're generally sheets that are like a plywood sheet, right? That's 4 feet by 8 feet. And then you map out how many paddles you can sort of fit in this sheet. You can look at the fiber orientation of the type, and then you sort of move the paddles to take advantage of some of those fiber, but only, like I said, only on the surface. You're only cutting this one dimension. So you sort of place these different paddles, and then you router them, or you cut them out with a laser jet or something, right? Or a water jet. Even with our paddles that are our honeycomb paddles, we make this is a ply of a sort of the surface that goes around the head this way. So as you can see, we actually cut each one of our surface plies. So even in our honeycomb paddle, we can reinforce areas that are generally weak. So you're going to find a lot of paddles break in the throat area, in the corners. So because we actually cut each section, each paddle is individually made. So we make each one of our shapes with our honeycomb paddle. So we can reinforce these areas and make our paddle stronger where a lot of the paddles fail. So even from that standpoint, with a Gearbox honeycomb paddle, there's a definite advantage over buying, a 4 by 8 sheet and just sort of cutting out a bunch of paddles from that sheet.
Perfect. Wow, I tell you, we're still getting some questions. I'm going to try and tie a few of these together. And I know I want to say both Laura and Anthony are in the chat answering some of these questions as well. I can see that going back and forth. Neil Metarata, I probably pronounced that name wrong, so I apologize to you, Neil, but he wanted to know what kind of tape works for protecting the edge. What was it? What special kind were you speaking about?
Generally, you could go to tennis shops. We have it online, although I believe right now we're maybe sold out of the one that's for the pickleball paddles. But generally, it's a cloth tape, and it's a little bit thicker. A lot of players out there use electrical tape, and they do that because you can find a lot of cool colors with electrical tape. Just remember, though, that maybe you'd want to apply a couple of extra pieces in the corners, because electrical tape is thinner and it'll wear through a little faster. So you want to just protect the edge a little bit more. Add a couple plies in here. Don't worry about the weight. It's not going to add too much. You're really just talking about protecting the paint around the edge, not necessarily the structure. And again, if you wear through that tape, take it off. Use the tape as your guide to let you know when you should change it. That's it. I mean, it's not anything structural, and it's just going to help protect the edge of your paddles. Okay,
so Deke Marshall wants a sneak peek, because here's what he says. He says, Rafael strikes me as a guy who is always pushing the envelope. Does that sound familiar? Yes. Is that familiar? He said, what can we expect from Gearbox in the future of paddle design?
To be honest, there's a lot of exciting ideas and technologies and products that we've already built. So it's just more of timing and, when we release. Right now, obviously, the situation going around the country and the world, slowed everything down. So hasn't slowed us down in terms of, creating products. So one of the first things, and I'll kind of, I think I wanted to touch on this point. Our GX5, our last year's model to this year, the GX5 for this year, they're quite different. The technology is the same. The way we make the internal, the solid span is the same, but the way they play and they sound and feel are very different. So we've sort of over the past 3 years have discovered what pickleball players are looking for in terms of play and feel. So now, what is our next step? Where are we going with this? Well, one of the advantages, we can keep these paddles very thin and very maneuverable. So what do players want? They want to have quick hands, very quick reflexes. So look for, extreme durability from our paddles, tremendous performance, very fast paddles, and some very unique shapes, some really nice, cool looking paddles that are gonna bring even more performance than what our current GX5 and GX6 are doing for in the market today.
Okay, Alan Rosenthal just jumped on, Dr. Pickleball. He was on the summit as well. Hello, Alan. He wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about grips, because that's another wonderful thing. You have a variety of grips for players to choose from. Grip sizes, what should they be looking for when they make their choice?
Okay, generally players that are I guess there's maybe two parts to that question. One is the grip type. So this is a urethane grip. This is a wrap grip that goes around the paddle. There is a lot of technology within the grips themselves. Some are a smooth grip like this one, where the surface, it's a urethane surface, so we can make the surface tacky. We can make it a little bit more slick, depending, not necessarily slippery, but some people like to change their hand from strong grip to a more open face grip. So having a very tacky grip, it's not going to be suited for those types of individuals. There's some that hold the paddle and they don't change their grip, so they don't want the paddle to move at all. So they'll prefer a very sticky sort of surface to their hand. Then there's grips that they're perforated, and the reason they're perforated, they absorb the moisture away from the surface and they bring it down into the felt or the underneath or the felt that's between the actual surface and the paddle handle. And what that does, it sort of brings the water in between and essentially keeping your hand dry a little bit longer. So there's some technology to keep the grip from slipping in your hand. There's also some that have like a sewn bead in here, so your fingers sort of lock in between that sewn edge. So then that gives you a little bit more comfort. So you can find quite a bit of technology in the actual grip material and grip type. Then we get into the grip size, right? So you have, this is like a number 1 or 4-inch circumference grip. In tennis, I know they're taught to close your hand and you don't want the grip to overlap or your fingers to touch. So they talk about getting a larger grip so you can have almost one finger of a gap between your thumb and your forefingers. I know badminton, racquetball, other racket sports, they tend to hold the paddle more with their fingers here, so it never overlaps. So it depends on what sport, your background, where you came from. I wouldn't say there's one particular style. In fact, I always go away from that. It's like, hey, find your own style and maybe you create, a new unique way of hitting the ball. So now what we do in terms of the grips, we mold everything, and I have a sample here. We mold everything with our small grip. You can see we've got this contour and the end cap, the contours here. So this is a small grip. This is a 3 5/8. And what we do is we use these covers, and I'm gonna show. So these covers actually are molded and contoured, and what they do is they snap onto the paddle. So by this, we're able to keep the same contours and follow the shape of the paddle. And we do that for both sides. So now we've taken that small handle and we built that up to a larger handle. And then from here, we wrap the grip and make this almost a 4-inch grip. So in terms of what we do, that is sort of what the standard is. So we can make a 3 5/8 or a 4-inch handle in terms of the size, the circumference.
Great. I think we're starting to wind down on the questions. I think that we have gotten to most of them. And I know, thank you to Anthony and Laura are in the chat answering those questions, and to Dale for pushing these to me so that I can ask Rafael. But people are starting to ask, how do they get to try Gearbox paddles? Is the only place to get them on the website? And is there, we know you have local reps, but how do people get in touch with that? So what's the best way to try the paddles?
One, we encourage that you find a local rep or a pro shop or one of our dealers. But if you cannot, we also to assist our reps and our dealers, we have a demo program. So you can go online, go to our website. For $20, you can take up to 4 paddles for a week, and the $20 really covers the shipping from Gearbox to your location, and then there's a return label that's that comes with the demo paddles, and then you're able to, after that week, ship the paddles back. We do that so you can get a choice of 4, so you can get a variety and be able to try and give yourself a week to sort of experiment with the different weights, different shapes. And for many people, when they try our demos, it's the first time they get away from a honeycomb paddle. So having the different weights and shapes for you to try it, we make that easy for you so you can have more of an opportunity to try the different weights. And again, kind of going back to our 8.5 ounce paddle feeling more like an 8 ounce, we encourage you to try a heavier one in there. Don't leave it out just because you think it's going to feel too heavy. I would at least put one in there, that way you can get the feel for our 8.5 ounce paddle. So that is I would say that's the best way to find our demos.
Okay. So JB Nimble wants to know if there's any benefit of using this paddle for someone with tennis elbow issues.
Tennis elbow, oh boy, that's a tough one. I mean, I'm not a medical doctor or anything, but generally, we find over the years that tennis elbow is more related to the grip and how people hold the paddle. So a lot of times they're holding the grip too tight. It's always very tense, so therefore putting a lot of strain on the elbow. We always suggest just holding the finger or the paddle extremely light in your hand, just light enough so it doesn't fly out of your hand. That's all you really need. So a lot of people you see, they're playing with a very strong grip and in that constant force. You don't really need that. Let the paddle do the work for you. Soften your hands and let that, the paddle sort of absorb that energy, keep a nice soft grip and keep it maneuverable. So I know there's some marketing out there in terms of, hey, well, we put either gels or beads and different things in to soften it. That's not going to really translate into, you could reduce the frequency or the vibration that comes through, and maybe that feels uncomfortable. But as far as curing and relieving the pain immediately, I think once you have some type of a tennis elbow, it's more take some time off and let heal, and then come back and maybe address how you hold your paddles. Yeah.
I think that's really good advice. I think we got this question answered in the chat, but there might be other people who didn't see it. So X-Men asked, what kind of warranty do the paddles come with?
We provide a 1-year warranty, and generally that's against the workmanship or manufacturer defects. I could tell you our warranty rate is by far the lowest in the industry. Maybe in a year we get a handful of, and what I mean a handful is probably less than 5 to 10 paddles that come back. And you'll find that with our paddles, because of the way they're constructed, they're never going to break down. So you don't have that paddle degradation where the surface separates from the core and the dead spots. It cannot do it. The returns that we have seen is from people who end up grinding a little bit too much, where they drag their paddle on the surface. Some little anger management issues, and they get upset, and a paddle may come back that way. But I'll tell you, we're not that we're very lenient, but we know that this paddle is not going to break, and it should never break, and the handles and the corners never fall apart. So if that ever occurred, it's sort of like, we're not going to give you a hard time about it. If a paddle comes back in 2 pieces, that's not normal play. But other than that, I mean, we say 1 year, but we're going to definitely stand behind our products. And so we don't say it's a lifetime, because if you read a lot of those claims, it's sort of like it's lifetime, but with a lot of conditions. Here, it's kind of, hey, it's 1 year, we're going to back our product. And even going further, we'll definitely stand behind our gear.
Okay, we're winding it down. We got about 2 more questions. One is pretty hyper technical, but we did build this as an Ask Me Anything. Okay. Jim Camasto said, if he gets the large grip, the 3 15th 16th, can he take off the clamshells and convert it to a small grip and or build it up with over grips?
Yes, absolutely. So when you order, let's say you ordered the large grip, it's actually going to come with the clamshells inside and then the wrap grip around it. So it'll look like this when you get it. But once you take that grip off, you're going to see the clamshells. And simply all you do is you just sort of like just snap it right off, take that one off and the second one, and now you've got the smaller grip. Now from here, let's say you want to build it up but not quite to the 4-inch circumference. You can either take a thicker grip and build it up that way, or what some people do is they put a single grip over this and then they wrap a second grip over. So how you build it up, you have a lot of freedom with this. Now I would not recommend you sand this handle down, because this is actual carbon fiber, and this is part of the structure. If you were to grind it or sand it down, you're compromising its integrity, or you could cause damage, and that would void a warranty. This is not a solid piece. This is actual hollow inside. It's about 40 thousandths of an inch, so you could sand through that, but there's no need. This is a pretty small handle already as it is, so we build it with the small one so you can go ahead and build it up from there. Great. And like Jim says, you can go up or you can come down with the grip size.
Yeah, based on your preference. Absolutely. I know we're starting to get a few repeat questions now because, and you can always, this replay, you can access it at any point in time. At the very beginning of this, I know some of you weren't able to join us when we started. Rafael showed us exactly what the technology was and how it's different. So if you didn't catch that, make sure you come back. The replay will be done up right after we're finished. A couple of people want to mention that you have a special right now, a free bag, I think, with orders.
Yeah, right now we've got an incredible deal going on. And, we're sitting around with, again, the situation going around with COVID-19 and, how do we keep people active? How do we keep ourselves active too? And just kind of keep things moving. The industry itself, if you notice, the tournaments came to a complete halt. Lots of parks have closed. So I know people are trying to get out there. And so we're working on how do we, just kind of keep the market going and keep, quite frankly, sales going as well. But how do we pass it forward, right? So we or pay it forward. We're very grateful for everything that has been going on. So we decided to, with every purchase of either one of our rackets from our racket sports or paddles, pickleball paddles, you get our alley bag, which is a $85 value free. So buy the paddle, you'll get this awesome bag that's included with the paddle. I mean, it's it's quite the deal. So we encourage for people to do it. It's while quantities last. We've got a few, and so it's definitely, we started that yesterday, and today I know there's a lot of work downstairs. Yes.
And I have to tell you, I love my Gearbox bag.
No, they're beautiful.
Oh yeah, I like the paddle, but I like the bag.
Yeah.
So here comes, I think we're gonna, we've got one that's a non-paddle question, but I think this is a big question. And let me go back here, because Waylon asked this. He said, are you going to make pickleball gloves with fingers or without fingers? Are you going to make pickleball gloves? And if you do, are you going to make them with or without fingers?
Okay. We make a glove now, and we made it for racquetball for many years, and we are working on designs to work more with pickleball. We have found that our glove works well, with the exception of the color. People say, well, it's black and I play outdoors and my hand can get hot. Whether it does or not, I'm not 100% sure. We haven't really tested the temperature, with the white leather versus the black, but whatever it is, people are asking for a lighter feel, and definitely we're going to work on creating, and in fact, we have several products already in design to address more of the pickleball play and the conditions of where pickleball is played outdoors. For example, humid conditions, for example, like Florida, and cold weather too. And so, yes, we're definitely addressing. Now, in terms of having the fingers cut off, we have, in most sports that we've researched, we have found that when you cut the fingers off, it really doesn't, there's not a benefit. Some people have said, well, I have more feel with it, but I still get, the grip. And I'm not 100% convinced on that. I mean, if you're going to wear a glove, we feel that you don't want the transition, and you don't want your fingers to be, have a little bit of moisture in it and a little bit more slippery than in your palm. So in the way pickleball is played, having your fingers touching the grip and have that sensitivity is important. So you don't want to necessarily have it be different from the palm and a little bit more moisture along the fingers. So I'm not sure if we're ready to make a glove without the fingers, not yet. If we have had a few people ask, but I wouldn't say not enough to really create something like a product without the fingers.
Okay. Another technical question. Kevin Osborne wants to know, is there any chance you'll make a clamshell that would take the grip up to 4.25 inches?
We can, definitely can. So the clamshell, what it is, these are molds, so we can increase its thickness. Now, we can't just make a thicker mold, because then we have to be concerned with the weight. So however, we can make it to where maybe make it more like a waffle style from the inside, so we can increase the circumference. So not a problem to be able to do that. Again, a lot of times it comes with the demand and more people requesting it. So the more we have and the more information we get from our customers and players, then we'll build those products for sure.
Here's a general question, and this is coming from Waylon, and he wanted to know, why don't paddle companies do trade-in or trade-ups? Any idea on that one?
Yes, it's always intriguing, and I would love to do it, but the question is, where are dealers in the business side of things? So whenever it would be nice to just say, hey, we'll trade your old paddles in, and actually it would benefit because we can take old inventory or older paddles out of the market, but it really becomes a challenge is, do we get our dealers involved to take those paddles in and then give a certain credit? And then if they do, how do we manage, that money going back to the dealers, or how do we give credit to the dealer? So it's more of a infrastructure issue rather than, but I think there is a benefit of taking old inventory out of the market. And then the other problem is, what do you do with that inventory? A lot of times they say, well, donate it for programs and do this. And from our experience, though, that those paddles, the idea of the donations and to get programs started in other countries works well, but they end up hurting the industry in some sense when you have this over production and sort of free paddles going out into the market. It happened to that in that market in racquetball, where you have this overproduction and these paddles. So we have to be very careful of the trade-ins and use paddles and products out there.
Okay, I think we've kind of got to the end of our questions, and there are some links. I know Anthony can put some links to the Gearbox site in the chat, so they'll be right there and it'll take you right to it. If you do have any questions that haven't been answered, any specific questions, feel free to Anthony or Rafael, or maybe Anthony can put it in the chat where you'd like those questions sent to you, and we'll help to facilitate those getting answered. Have you got any idea, or are we going to turn that over to Anthony? Rafael, have you got any idea, or should we turn? That's okay. Should we turn it?
Yeah, we can turn it over to Anthony, but can I address one thing that I didn't, they asked the question of, and it was on choosing the paddle, the control versus the power. One thing I'd like to mention real quick is, why a control versus a power. One of the reasons we also designed the control is to address different ball conditions. And by that we mean we can take pretty much the same paddle, whether it's the power and the control. Let's say these two models were the same. But if you're playing with a hard ball, for example, like the Dura, or you're playing with the wind at your face or behind you, well, one of the ideas with the control and the power was to create a paddle where you would simply exchange the paddle in your hand. It's almost like string tension. On different conditions, if you went to altitude, you'd use a lower string tension, and down at sea level, you'd probably increase your string tension. So you really can't do that with a paddle. So we created these two choices so you can utilize them. And that's what's really neat. You can switch back and forth with the Gearbox paddles and sort of keep your same stroke. The idea is not change your swing too much. You sort of adjust or change the paddle in your hand to accommodate those conditions, whether it be the ball or wind conditions. So that kind of gives you a little bit more of a choice, in terms of which paddle to use, as well as the weight, including the weight.
Perfect. And I see that Anthony in the chat answered, if you have any questions that we haven't gotten to today, and boy, I got to tell you, you have killed it. You've knocked it out of the park in terms of answering the questions. You could get them answered by an email to info@gearboxsports.com. I think I
Yes.
gave the correct answer. Anthony, is there anything else that you want people to know? Or Anthony, I'm sorry, I'm thinking Anthony and I'm talking to Rafael. I got too many things going on at one time.
I think that's why I didn't answer earlier. I wasn't sure if you were speaking with me, but okay.
Is there anything else that you would like our viewers to know about Gearbox and how to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, again, participate in the free bag deal. It's definitely a smoking deal. You know, find the closest dealer to you. Also, check out our demo program. That's a very easy way for all of you to check out our paddles and test drive 4 at a time. And visit our website. I think we've got lots of great products. It's gearboxsports.com. We're passionate athletes out here building products, and we enjoy what we do. So I have a lot of passion for playing sports, pickleball, and also designing the product. So, and then any feedback, I didn't mean to sound negative for the person who talked about the glove without the fingers. I mean, we accept that feedback. It's just, we're always gauging, like, when somebody's looking for a product, you hear a lot about it frequently. But so anyway, just send the feedback and we'll see what products we build, and together I think we can evolve and build the next generation of equipment.
Well, and I would like to thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us. Even though I've been playing with the paddle for a while, I certainly learned a lot today. I know it was different from things I'd played before, but I didn't know the exact reasons why. So I get a great education today. So if you're in the market for a new paddle, test Gearbox out. And like you said, right now, that bag is just a killer deal. So thank you so much, Rafael Filippini, the owner of Gearbox Sports. We appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Don't miss next Tuesday. We got Don Stanley, certified referee. He's coming back to answer more of your questions about rules. And man, that could go on forever. So.
Longer than mine.
No, whenever anybody's passionate about anything, they knock it out of the park. And Rafael, you knocked it out of the park. Thank you so much. And you know how I always end these? I always end them by saying, together we can train smart, live bold, and age well. See you, everybody.